Good morning.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Continuing our journey in the summary of the end of Ayin Beis. We are on 2/3 of the way down on page 1430. Someone says something?
No, I just said good morning, Rabbi.
Oh, good morning. Okay. So to sum up what we're learning, so based on a Biy'a Azer from the Samach Tzedek, which in turn is based on Alter Rebbe's Maimer, discussing a Zohar in Parsha Vayera that talks about how God governs the universe, with the example of a potter's wheel. So he says the essential theme of what he calls kavanas hamaimer, the intention, the purpose of this maimer in the Zohar is to come to explain that on one hand we say mipi elyon is that evil does not come from above. So why is there evil in the world? So it's a result of our actions. Our actions in turn trigger the God serving like the potter, turning the wheel to go to the left or to the right based on our actions. And that causes, after a number of devolutions and gradations, can cause there to be evil in the world. So that's what elicits judgment, our actions. So the Zohar is wondering, as he said, Ad heichen magihu magia. Our effort, how high does it reach? How far does it reach above? So right now we've established it reaches into Malchus, but not higher. So to explain that, the paragraph on page 1430, which we learned in the previous class, it says, Va'inyan that the 10 spheres, and especially the mides, from the word medida, measure, serve as an interface between Ein Sof, Ein Sof, and existence, and the Elamis, because Ein Sof on its own is completely removed from the 10 spheres. That's removed from all midas altogether. All emotions, and also midas means measurements and parameters and limits and boundaries. Even in Atzilus, and definitely from Biy'a. So for a divine energy, in a way that makes sense to us, to manage and to supervise and oversee existence, Hanhogas ha'olamis, that's through the midas. Chesed hu hashpah lahachis. So chesed, starting from the first midah, is the hashpah, is the transmission to give life. Mechalkal chayim bechesed, that with chesed he bestows and sustains life, which is called chesed elam, because it's a chesed that's connected to existence. It's a kindness that relates to existence. In contrast, chesed the atik, which is called chaya nishmosa, chaya elam, is a mocker for there to be chaya gufa. So they're sustaining the so-called body of existence, and they're sustaining the soul of existence. So the chesed of atik is chaya nishmosa, which is not a mocker at all. You can't call it a mocker for chaya gufa, for the so-called the body of existence, only for the soul of existence. And he compared it to the difference between the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim, the 13 divine attributes of compassion that of Moshe, and Micha. So it's two different Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. The difference being Yud Gimel Midas of Micha, Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim is in the Atik, and the Chaya Neshamis, Chaya Lukus. So it's more the soul of existence. And Moshe, Himshich, which also includes, like he said in the parentheses, Atzilus and Biy'a, but it's all the so-called soul of existence, the Chaya Lukus, the divine part. And Moshe, Yud Gimel Zarachmin, was nimshach into Zah, into the midas, like Chesed Elam, Chesed of Zah, which is Chaya Gufim, and also the body of existence. Why? Because the Chesed of Atzilus then is Nesamsim. It's become diminished to be commensurate with existence, with the world. And then he compared the difference between the Mekabolim Arashenim, who called it Gedula, what the Ramak, Pardes, and Arizal call Chesed. What's the difference? So Gedula, and we found where it's discussed earlier was chapter 240 in volume 1, in case you want to look it up. Gedula is chesed, mitzad Gedula, mitzad bli gvul. That's like chesed that's higher than Atzilus. And when you say chesed, you're already talking about a chesed that is subject to a more limited form. He calls it bittul v'tzimtzum. And what that means, in Avodah, he said there's a chesed that comes from a magnanimity, from like the king who's just giving because he's in a state of wanting to just give. And there's a chesed that comes at shiflus ubitl, he said. It's at shiflus atzmei. A person who feels he doesn't need anything for himself. For whatever the reason, he doesn't feel he needs anything for himself. This way he's mashpia to the zulas. That's like chesed dezah, chesed shemitzad habitl. Now it has a quality because it is a bitl, the person's feeling not expansive. He's feeling actually like very diminished in a way, in a good way. And that's causing him to give chesed. So he compared that. He said, Yesh Lemer, that's what we said earlier, the yichud b'kavon el yena. That the intention here is that you're a bottle to understanding what God wants to do with chesed. It's not about you. It's not about what you're getting from chesed or the chesed that you're giving. It's all about the kavon el yena of why God emanated chesed. That is the chesed of Atzilus. And it's called Sada Bittul V'Atzimtzum. And that's where we stopped. I will continue from there to around 2/3 of the way down the page. The line that begins, Commission is bar le'il, the word omnam. We'll start from there, and we are going to learn that. That is, the pages can be found if you want to follow the text at ayinbeis.com. It says, omnam, that's chesed of Zah of Atzilus. Omnam b'chinas chesed da'atik, going back to the chesed that's on a higher level. Like we learned earlier, everything evolves from higher states to lower states. Chesed of atik, has no relationship at all to the life of the body of existence. Chaya gufim, he calls it. That's the expression. Must be based on maybe the Kabbalistic terminology, but that's what he calls it, chaya gufim, as opposed to chaya neshamas, like he said before, chaya neshmasa. V'hu, and now he's going to explain it a little further. Now, keep in mind, the reason he's talking about these levels goes back to what we learned earlier. When he spoke about Oisius, when Hamayich Be'echad, we're learning about how to connect existence to the divine. We do it in stages. So first we connect our chesed to the chesed of Atzilus. Then we connect the chesed of Atzilus to the chesed that's higher than Atzilus, all the way up to the highest levels. And here we're also talking about the shinin ispilus, that our efforts below affect Malchus. But we didn't get back to that yet. Meanwhile, he's talking about the 10 spheres as they serve, and especially the Midas and Chesed as an interface. But interface is only in Atzilus, because Atik is already beyond existence. It is an entity, but it's beyond existence, like he's saying here. So he's contrasting now Atzilus and higher than Atzilus. So he's continuing now. He says, V'ahu al derech masha amar. He's going to bring back something we learned earlier about Hu Shmai Bilvad. I'm sorry, Ata Kodesh Shimcha Kodesh, sorry. That this difference that we're talking about here, we're talking about Chesed of Atik, is similar to what it says, Ata Kodesh, you, God, are holy, sacred, V'Shimcha Kodesh, and your name is sacred. So what are these two levels of Ata, V'Shimcha? So earlier we learned that Ata is Atzmus, and Shimcha we learned is God's expression, shame. Even the concept of his expression. So here he's going to connect like this. The im hayes sheshneim kadosh. Even though this says the same word kadosh by both of them, mokol mokim yesh hefresh beineim. There's a difference between them. First of all, Ata and Shimcha are two different words. Secondly, he says Ata kadosh v'Shimcha. He doesn't say Ata v'Shimcha kadosh. You and your name are holy. So you see right away from that there's two levels here. There's a difference between them. And what's the difference? The Ata Kodesh who Shafila b'china ziv v'heid loy hay elam Shafila b'china ziv v'heid loy hay elam isechem lekabel menu. That on the level of Ata Kodesh, even a reflection of that level of Ata is beyond existence, and the worlds would be unable to receive from there. It would be too intense. Think of a very powerful light that blinds us. Here it's even further than that. Like he said earlier when he spoke about, Al Kaponim, that's Ata Kodesh. Ubchina Shimcha, you say Shimcha Kodesh. Shimcha, who Shabchina Saziv Yechelim Lekabel. Like we learned earlier, once you have a name means you have something to call the person by. Lamaila means you have something to call God by a name. So there's some handle here. It's not yet fully developed into a spheres, as we learned in the highest levels, but it's something that you could already say God is expressing himself so another can call him. Hu shebchinas haziv yechelim lekabel u'kamei hoidu al eretz v'shamayim b'chinas heid v'ziv. Like we said, hoidu, hoidoi. His glory is upon the earth and heaven. That means it's already relating to existence. B'chinas heid v'ziv. So it's interesting. He uses the words, earlier he used the word ziv v'hoid. Now he used hoid v'ziv. So in both of them, he's using the expression of his glory, of his reflection. But one is a reflection of the divine as is beyond existence, and one is a reflection that existence ultimately can integrate, internalize. Val derech zeh, he's comparing this to the difference between hubchinas chesed da'atik v'chesed dezah. So chesed da'atik is removed. It's all about God's power of chesed. That's bli gvul, like we said, and is beyond existence. And chesed dezah, that's already relating chesed elam to existence. V'hainu lefisha chesed dezah hubchinas v'keli mamish. And this is due to the fact that chesed of Zah is already an and a keli. There's an energy, the energy of kindness, but the energy has taken on a shape and form. It has a container. It has it manifests. It's like we talked the difference between when you say the one cell of after the conception of a fetus, that one cell doesn't have yet kalim. There's no body yet. It's one cell. But then later, as it develops, starts developing limbs and organs. So the oir of the energy of the soul and its faculties is beginning to take on shape and form into some type of substance. So he's saying here that in Atzilus, like we learned earlier, there's hargasha, there's a full-blown emotion here. So therefore, there's eir v'keli mamish, she'eiru shemisamtzim lefi erech ha'keli. And the oir has become diminished and concealed, so it should be able to fit and be commensurate to the container. And it's these containers that allow that the energy be channeled through the containers that will ultimately become the source for Biy'a through Malchus, as we'll learn. So there you have the interface. Chesed of Atik, or the levels of Atik higher than Atzilus, are much more divine, and you can't call them yet an interface into existence, because they don't relate to existence yet. They are manifest, they're not atzmus mamish, but they are manifest, but they're beyond. Chesed of Atzilus, and in general the midas of Atzilus and the 10 spheres of Atzilus, now are not yet Biy'a, but they have become a structure, a divine structure that can become now the source of Biy'a. Before I continue, let me stop if anybody wants me to clarify anything. Okay. Now, in describing more the details of how the process works, remember, it's not just the 7 emotions of Atzilus, but also the Chabad. So he says the following: Ubchinas Chochma dezah, hu makar hachesed dezah. Chochma of Zah, in other words, the wisdom that guides the midas. We know the midas are definitely medida, like he said, they measure, and that's the experience. But there's an intelligence behind that. So the Chochma of Zah, hu makar hachesed of Zah. That's the source of chesed of Zah. So like Zah itself has Chochma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gvura. So the Chochma of Zah is the makar of chesed of Zah. Pirushu ha-chochma eich sheyiyah chesed lashpia achayim. The Chochma guides and directs chesed how, in what manner should the chesed be mashpia life. We said mechalkel chayim b'chesed. He sustains life with chesed. So it's the Chochma of Zah that guides it. Let's talk on a human level. When you want to show chesed to someone, kindness and love, so it's not just reckless, it's not just chaotic. You figure with your mind, you say, this is the chesed I want to show that this person needs, or that fits into the person's kelim, that is appropriate to bestow upon another. So that's why he's adding that. I'm not sure exactly. Probably just to explain the whole process of how the interface works, but maybe it'll come clear when he comes and ties it all together. So Chochma is eich sheyiyah chesed lashpia achayim. And the Rebbe Rashab adds now, to me it seems that this whole piece must be from another mimer. And then the Rebbe Rashab is adding explanations. I'd have to find that mimer. I'm not sure where that is. Okay. So now comes a parenthesis where he's going to explain this idea of Chochma guiding how Chesed should be transmitted to give life, like we said, Chaye Gufa, the body of existence. Biy'a Shleimer, he says, that this is, with Biy'a Shleimer, you can say that this is like it says in Biyuri Azeir, another Biyuri Azeir, most likely from the Mittler Rebbe, and I think Tzemach Tzedek has an explanation as well on this. Vayishlach, on the Maimer Azeir, on the Posuk, Ki Yeshorim Darkei Hashem. So the Posuk says, the verse says, the paths of God are straight. So the Zohar explains what that means. So the Biyuri Azeir explains the Zohar that what paths are we talking about? So he's going to explain these are the pathways, the channels that God uses to channel divine energy into existence. Pirush, the B'darkei Hashem, be'inyan hakav v'chut, hanimshach me'erein sof. So we know after the tzimtzum, it says a straight line, a kav v'chut literally means a line and a thread of light entered into this empty black hole space that the tzimtzum created. In the example, it would be like the teacher, after being completely silent and a complete concealment of his intelligence, then will begin to stream consciousness and ideas to the student. That's the kav. So the kav is essentially, called it God's paintbrush, God's stylus. It's like a laser beam. It's not expansive as the oil before the tzimtzum. There was no kav. It was just oil filled everything, without any limits or boundaries. Here it's a kav, so it creates a hierarchy of higher and lower, and this kav will travel, so to speak, through the whole, this chol l'makam poni, and create all the worlds, ak, akudim, nekudim, vrudim, Atzilus, Biy'a, Yitzir, Asiyah. So he's comparing now, he didn't finish yet, but he's just saying that what we just learned about how chesed sustains existence is al derech what it says in Biy'a Azeir. So let's continue the explanation. So this kav, hanimshach me'erein sof, where does it originate from? From the Ein Sof, the infinite light that's beyond existence. That was there before the tzimtzum. Then there was a tzimtzum and concealment, and then came this flow. Shehu al derech mashal, this kav is like, for example, sinir, like a channel. Sinir is a channel, a pathway, a channel, hamakaleach mayim minor gadol, that gathers water from a big river. So let's say you have a big river and you want that river to irrigate let's say the fields around the river, or to draw water in some other way. So you need to create channels, and you see that. That's what irrigation is all about. That from the big river, the expansive river, minor gadol, from a great river, there's the tziner, the channel that channels the water, umamala kelim ha'emdim svivav, and it fills up the containers that are there. I mean, the kelim could be several things. It could be the kelim that that irrigate the fields, or it could be kelim that you're actually drawing water. So instead of going to the river itself, you channel the river into a more narrow flow, a narrow channel, and that way it can now fit into the kelim. Think of trying to pour water from a big barrel into a small cup. You need channels, you need like funnels. So the same thing here. So the kav is like that type of tzinner. Ein Sof is just infinite light. The kav takes that light and channels it into the state into the chol l'mokim ponim that creates existence. That's what he explains in Biy'a Hazeh. So it's like a channel. Because he goes on to say that from the big tzinner, first you have bigger channels, then you have narrower channels. So it's a constant channeling process, basically, that allows from the infinite to come into the finite structure. The yesh b'zeh chochma muka, he explains there. There's a tremendous, a deep wisdom that's required to know how to do this properly. Shal pi oisha ha-chochma, that according to that wisdom and intelligence, Ayin Beis, Ayin means you immerse yourself. And you conceive, Yifakich from the word pikach. You conceive, you innovate ideas. How that channeling should take place. So it sounds simple. Once we see it happening, it sounds simple. But someone had to create that technology. I'm talking now on the human level. So how do you? The river is a very big river. You have to find ways to make sure that the river is channeled properly, and the way it should be channeled, and the right measure. It shouldn't overflow. Remember, in times when there's like a flood, that's what happens. These channels can be overflowing. They create a lot of damage. So in other words, there's a deep wisdom, what he's saying, in figuring out how the manner that this channel should flow, so the energy should flow through it. And how much more so do you need a strategic, you need an intelligence to make sure that it reaches every separate place in its particular way. Like he said, the smaller channels. So this is an example of water, but take the same things with electricity. The building of technologies like circuit breakers that allow the electricity to be able to energize an appliance is not a simple matter. Because how do you make sure the electricity doesn't blow the circuits if there's a surge? Or that electricity is not too diminished. So it's a whole wisdom and building of how to monitor the gauges and the levers and the regulating the flow in a proper manner. And this is true consistently throughout. I remember reading somewhere, what is the single greatest innovation today in all technology? So everybody talks about the smartphone, the microchip, and this and that and that. AI. They said the single thing that is the hardest thing of all is the delivery of FedEx or UPS, because there you have to have human beings. Millions of packages are delivered a day, and almost 99% on time and to the right location. So someone has to manage that. You have to manage the planes. You have to manage, first of all, the pickup, and then the pickup to go to a central station, and then from the central station to be delivered, and the planes that fly all across the country or across the world, and then delivery to a central station again, and then to bring it to each location. It just came to mind as I'm reading this. That is not a simple matter. You need to have a brilliant strategy to do that, because in technology, once you have the technology figured out, you don't have the human being. Here it's humans that have to do the delivery and the shipping and so on. Anyway, just pointing it out. It's not so relevant to the particular points made here. So he's comparing the kav, basically the chochma that the midas need to guide them to be able to, for them to govern and hanhogas ha'elamis, to govern existence, comes with a wisdom behind it. Just like you have the wisdom of any government that's managing a country or a state or a city or a locality or a municipality, you have to have, there's a wisdom of how you do that, managing all the different services and utilities that need to be brought to all the people. So Essentially, that's what he's saying here in this parentheses, and he's going to come back to compare that to the Chochma in the middays of Atzilus that guide them of how to and in what manner to be mashpia in an exact manner. Now you can start seeing the picture emerging here, because this is, if you recall, the Malachim serve a lower level of this. They're like the digestive system that also distributes, but they are already from Atzilus into Biy'a. Here we're talking in Atzilus itself. There's also a process at work here of how divine energy channels into the structure of existence. So to continue on, so Chochma Ya'ayin Atzilus B'chlal u'B'kol Shkein B'frat L'chol Mokim B'fnei Atzmei. So that's the example. Now, what about the kav? U'kamoy kein hakav. Similarly is with the kav, that stream, that line and thread of energy that enters into the chol l'makom panim of the tzimtzum, caused by the tzimtzum. Hakav hu b'chinas atzinner hagadol. The kav is like a tzinner hagadol. It's like a wide channel. It's that first channel. Hanimshech mahanor hagadol. And where is that channel coming from? From the great river, which is what in the Nimshal is b'chinas Ein Sof. So Ein Sof is the great river. The tzinner gadol, the first channel is the kav that's channeling that great river Ein Sof. And from that extends into Tzunedes Ktanim. In other words, that one channel then branches off into smaller channels to be able to again measure the flow and regulate it according to the recipients. Now, and the manner to know exactly how these Tzunedes, how these channels should be mamshich, the energy that's flowing through them, that's according to the Chochma of Torah, sheti amshacha b'madrega zu, that this amshacha, this flow, should be in this level, u'ba'olam zeh, and in this world, ba'efen kach v'kach, in this particular manner. Each one needs to be tailored to fit exactly the level and the world that it is flowing into. U'b'zeh, in one dimension to flow in one way, and another in another way. Like similar to a teacher who has several students, and he has to find a way to make sure that each student receives properly. Some students can receive more, some need more time, more examples, more details. So this is the chochma that lies behind this hamshacha. The Rebbe Rashab is using this to explain the chochma of Zah, of Atzilus, that guides the midas of how to be mashpia to Biy'a. Chaim. That's chesed. All this was an explanation of the midas of Atzilus. He started with chesed. Now he's going to go to gvura. The second midah in Atzilus is gvura. The gvura l'tzamtzem achayis. Gvura is not about the flow per se, it's about how to diminish it, to make sure that it's limited. Now, I understand that's part of the sinner as well. The sinner also diminishes it, but still the focus is there, how much you're giving, and in what manner you're giving. The gvura is the power that is like the brakes to the gas that limits the flow. And what guides gvura? If Chochma guides chesed, what guides gvura? Also something on the left brain, the left side of the brain, bina. Ubina hu aseichel b'chinas gvura zu. Bina is the intelligence behind the gvura. Eich v'kama roi liyas atzimtzum. How and to what extent is appropriate to create this tzimtzum? So if we only had gvura chesed, and you had the chochma of within chesed, you know how to flow. But there's also a manner of also restraint of knowing what to hold back, and what not to pass on, to conceal it. And that's the bina, the intelligence behind gvura. And what about the third midah? The third midah we said is rachamim. V'rachim ukava emtzoi, and he doesn't explain it. Earlier he said rachamim combines the chesed gilui and the gvura helam, and that to understand how they work together. Here he's not explaining, but he's relying that we understand it on our own, that the Kav Emtsoi is essentially the balance between the Chesed and the Gvura. So if you really break it down, you need all these different aspects that create the proper way of governing existence, like he called Anhogas Ha'elemis. So this is a long explanation of how what the role of the Midas of Atzilus serving as interface between the Ein Sof and to Biy'a, the structure of existence. Mostly focused on Chesed. At the end, he brings a little of Gvura and then Rachamim, the Kav Emtsoi. And with that, he finishes this paragraph. Obviously, we're not finished. We have plenty more to talk about because he's coming to still explain the tikla, the wheel of Malchus, how that is affected by our Avodah. This is all a part of the explanation. So he's going to continue now on the next page. But I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything.
Rabbi Simon, how would you connect the fact that we know that Chochma is just like a spark, an idea, and that's connected to Chesed, and Bina is our Chava, and this way, that way, in all directions, and that's connected to Tzimtzum?
It's a good question. Firstly, the first thing that comes to mind is that Chochma and Bina have many aspects to them. One aspect is what you just said, the spark of Chochma like a Nakuda, and Bina is like the hay, expansive, Rechevas Hanor actually. Bina is called the expansion of the river. And then there's other aspects to Chochma and Bina, like Chochma being on the right side, which is where Chesed is, and Bina being on the left side where Gvura is. So under Chochma comes Chesed, and under Bina comes Gvura. So that's number one, that each sphere has many aspects to it, and they don't always have to be reconciled. That's also if you go deeper, you could probably find some explanation that Chochma, remember, in that spark is concentrated a tremendous amount of power. It's a spark, but it's still the highest level of intelligence because it's coming straight from Keser. Bina is more expansive, but it's not like Chochma is compared to the Mayon, to a live wellspring. Bina is compared to a river. So it could be that maybe connected to that as well. But the real question maybe has to be asked is, why is Chochma on the right and Bina on the left? Why is Bina, which is expansive, on the left side, which connects to Smoil, like Gvura, which is more Tzimtzum? It would seem to make sense that Bina is more expansive, seems like more of Ashpa in that context. So that's another way of rephrasing your question. I'd have to give it some more thought. It may be explained in other places in Chassidus. Right now, I don't recall offhand, but I could look it up. But you could also look it up in the Erchim on Bina, Chochma, and Sefer Alikutim, the Machzedek.
Because it's not the source. That's why.
No, I understand. But Bina is connected to Gvura, which is more Tzimtzum. Why is Bina so expansive? That's the question here.
It's not necessarily expansive. It seems expansive because it takes everything and breaks it up into palpable things. That's it.
Okay, that's possible. That's fine. I understand. Bina does have a Gvura element because it does break down things, and Gvura breaks things down as well. But it's a good thing. It's an interesting question and something to think about. As I said, I would look first in Chassidus if there's any sources that talk about it. As I said, often I don't remember right now, but maybe there is. And then see if there is, then we can just look at what they explain. And if there isn't, maybe, like I just said, Chochma is definitely more intense, though it's concentrated, and Bina is less intense, but more expanded, meaning it's like you just said. You took an intense, concentrated point, like a seed, and you expanded it outward. And that, in a way, could be considered a tzimtzum even. Because Chochma has a certain clarity that comes from the very source. And Bina, once you develop it, it breaks down into details. You can get lost in the details. So in a way, you can lose. It's like it conceals sometimes the very core essence of the concept, which Chochma retains. That's why you always need to have a connection between Chochma and Bina. Anyway, I'm just saying a few thoughts that come to mind.
Even though that the Sheresh of Bina could be even higher than Chochma, you learn that, you remember that the Sheresh, the koyach to be able to do that, is a very high level.
Okay, that's another point here, but that's not what he's saying. But right now, the main thing here is he's saying that Chochma guides Chesed and Bina guides Gvura. He doesn't speak a lot about it. I also would want to find the source for the Rebbe Rashab here, the Ayin Beis. I see I didn't mark myself a source. I want to see what another Maimorim that talk about this. So that's what we usually do. That's what I would do. And every one of you can do that homework as well. Look around to see if other Maimorim talk about this topic. Okay.
Rabbi,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Rabbi, the bet din that the Zohar talks about, that's below the wheel, below Malchus of Atzilus. So we
You
haven't
asked
gotten
that
to that
question
yet.
yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah, you asked that, and I responded. The wheel is God turning the wheel that governs existence, which is
Right.
determined by our actions. You don't
Right.
convene a bezdin until somebody needs a bezdin.
Right.
So first, you have to have people living their lives, going about their affairs, and then when there's when there's something they do that's a transgression, and judgment is needed, that's when a bezdin is convened. So
Right.
likely here is that once the potter, so to speak, turns the wheel, it's
Right.
all connected to that. I mean, he didn't go into details. He just said one short line on the previous page. You're going back earlier, not what we learned now, right? You asked me
Right.
about what we learned yesterday.
Yesterday, but the rabbi just mentioned that now we're going to get into the wheel, and then
We've
so I
already
thought
talked about the wheel at length yesterday in the previous classes. The
the
wheel
rabbi
we've talked
just
about.
mentioned in the next
The
paragraph
Bezdin is
coming.
mentioned briefly. Let me just see here. Where is it mentioned? It's mentioned in where's he mentioned? Where's he mentioned the Bezdin? Thought it
To
was
me,
on the
it's very
previous page.
fascinating with the wheel and the Besdin.
He doesn't talk about the Bezdin really at length. He talks about the wheel at length, relatively. The Bezdin he just mentioned, let's just see the exact language. Listen, I want to look inside. I don't want to talk from memory. You have the book, the Sefer in front of you?
I don't, but I have another thing I wanted to bring up.
Hold on, one second. Let's deal with one thing at a time. Let me just see how he says it here.
The actions of humanity affect the turning of the wheel, which then affects somehow goes down into the Besdin. And that's all occurring at the Malchus of Atzilus and below, right? I think that's correct.
Yes, correct. That's correct.
So I'm looking here on the Tuesday.
One second.
Okay.
I want to find this piece about the Bezdin before I continue. I have to cite. I want to see it inside. I don't see it now. Okay, I don't find it right now. Yeah, what do you want to add?
It says when you look on page 72 of the Chabad Siddur, Hayom Yom Shlishi Bashabbos, it says today is the third day of the week, on which Levium and the Beit HaMikdash used to say, it's a song from Tehillim by Asaph. It says, Hashem, God stands in the council of judges. Among the judges, he renders judgment. And then it goes on from that. So I'm wondering if this Hayom Yom, this Tehillim relates to the potter's wheel and the Bet Din.
I have no idea.
I always wondered about this Hayom Yom. It seems like this might be what's going on. We're learning about it now. I don't know.
I can't say. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Hashem is standing in the council of judges, and among the judges, he renders judgment. So maybe
we know this without the Zohar. The fact that God renders judgment is the whole point of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Hadin.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the concept of judgment. We know that, yeah.
Yeah, but here it's saying he's rendering judgment within the council of judges.
Therefore,
Rosh Hashanah,
we have Hu Ubezdin. We know that concept of Hu Ubezdinoi, God and his court. What's your point?
Oh, does that happen? God and his court happens on Rosh Hashanah?
Also Rosh Hashanah and also every day. I mean, you have the concept of a Bezdin Shalmaila.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but this is not discussed here. This is not what he's discussing here, really.
Okay.
He mentioned, I'm trying to find where he mentioned, I can't even find it now. But I'm
Okay.
sure it'll come up. Yeah.
Sorry for asking novice type questions, Rabbi, but I'm really
It's
a
not
novice.
novice. The novice doesn't, the question is whether it's relevant to what we're learning here. That's the question.
Okay. Right.
Not the novice part is it's nothing, no question is novice. Every question is legitimate. The question is if it's relevant to what we're learning here.
Right. Well, maybe the Rebbe Rashab will get to it later on.
He's not going to get to it. He's not going to go back to this. I don't think so.
Okay. All right.
He spoke earlier about who Bezdinai quite a few pages back, but here I think, yeah.
Okay. Sorry for interrupting.
No problem. Let's continue now. Any other questions?
If I can just suggest to Moshe, you can go to Safaria and put in the phrase Elokim Hitzav Badas Kel, and then search for that, and you can differentiate the responses by, is it Tanakh, is it Talmud, is it Chassidus? You can just say, look, and then Chassidus, I'm looking at 12 sources, but I don't have time to read them all. But maybe it's there somewhere. You may see that, like, what's the Chassidic interpretation of that phrase?
From the Hayom Yom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just suggesting that to help you out.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. If there are no other questions, let's continue. Just a moment. Oh, I know where it was. It wasn't in Ayin Beis. When we read the Zohar mentioned Bezdin.
Right. It was the Zohar.
Yeah, but so I don't even want to. I don't think it's relevant to our conversation here at all. I thought it was an Ayin Beis. That's another story. The Zohar mentions it, so you have to study the Zohar and look into it, but it's not relevant to our conversation here per se.
Okay.
Okay, good. So we continue now the new page on page 1431, new paragraph, where he continues the discussion. Omnam. So after explaining how mides, specifically and in general, the 10 spheres of Atzilus are like an interface that allow for the hanhagas ha'olamis ayidei hamidis. He says, Omnam kol zeh. However, everything we just discussed, hu shebatzilus gufa, b'chinas zohu shenimdad liyas, b'chinas moka Biy'a. Like they say below, missing a word here. All this is how an Atzilus itself is preparing the ground, so to speak, for the hashpah, for the transmission to flow from Ein Sof, which is beyond structure, into structure. But it's all within Atzilus, and Zav Atzilus, Shenimdad, that measures, Midah, from the word Nimdad, Medida, measuring, defining, Liz B'chinas Moker Biy'a. Whereas Chesed of Atik is higher than being a Moker. Can't call it a source, it's removed, it's beyond. Here, at least we've achieved that, but it's still all in Atzilus. So relative to higher than Atzilus, this is already a structure. But as he's going to say, relative to Biy'a, Atzilus is also Ein Sof, and that's why we need Malchus. and Malchus to be mislabish and matat. And this is now he's going to bring us back to this whole discussion of the interface of Malchus and matat and the Malachim, and how that's where the Maisa Tachtenim, our actions, touch and reach. So that's where he's leading now. So he discussed Atzilus. He's telling us to look elsewhere. This was also explained earlier in chapter, let's see, I have it here, 145. Chapter 145, also in volume 1. There he's discussed the Bishtalsus as the Sridus Batzilus is based Madregas. That in the evolution of the process of the spheres, in Atzilus there's two levels. There's the spheres that are necessary for Atzilus itself to function. And it's how these spheres are evolving in order to prepare to create Biy'a. So think of it like a king as he governs his empire, his nation. So there's the way he governs his own palace and his own staff. That's like in Atzilus itself. And then there's the way he governs the people. That's another aspect that the chesed of Atzilus can go for Atzilus itself, for the purpose of Atzilus itself, or the chesed of Atzilus is in order to prepare the ground for chesed of Biy'a, Yitzir, Asiya, Biy'a. So he's throwing that into the picture here just to give a full picture of how the process works. Okay, so that's two things in Atzilus itself. Legabe Biy'a, this is all in Atzilus, but compared to Biy'a, the next world, B'chinas Eses Riz Atzilus, B'chinas Ein Sof Adayin. So compared to before Atzilus is already, like we said, the tzinner, channels, structure, medida of the midas. But compared to Biy'a, the 10 spheres of Atzilus are still a level of Ein Sof. And I've already explained how you could have Ein Sof relative Ein Sof. It all depends on what level you're talking about. For what one person is defined and limited, for another person is over their head. Think of anything you learn. Some person who's mastered a certain idea, they contain it. For someone who's just learning it, it could be something above their head. Just as a simple example. But the same idea is also in the levels of Elikus. It's all relative. Not just the oiris of Atzilus, the energies of Atzilus, but also the kelim of Atzilus, which were channels to contain and confine the oiris of Atzilus, but compared to Biy'a, even the kelim are Ein Sof. Like it says in the book of Formation, Sefer Yetzirah, Esses spheres bli ma. He calls the 10 spheres without substance. Bli ma. Midosan Eser, their number or their measure is 10. She'ein lem sof. So there are 10, but they are each one of but the 10 are in a state of ma. They don't yet have the defined substance, for example, like it is in the yesh of Biy'a. So they have no sof. The hainu gam kamoishe b'chinas midah v'gvul. Meaning, even as they are in a form of measure and a finite form, like we spoke earlier, the midah from the word medida, shezel idea kelim, which is that's what happens through the containers of Atzilus. Hey mekol mokim b'chinas ein sof. Nevertheless, they still retain an element of Ein Sof in comparison to Biy'a.
Can you take a very quick question?
Let me finish the idea, because then sometimes questions will be answered. Like he sells elsewhere. 1 second. Okay, yes.
I understand on the one hand why he would say, and even the Kalim are Ein Sof. I understand his point, but just by contrast, not to challenge him to say, "Oh, how obvious!" But if you say the Oros and Kalim and Atzilus are if you say that they're all one, part of the shlemus of God's holiness, then maybe this statement is not. It's to me, it's more obvious. I don't know. How do you relate to that?
That you happen to learn Chassidus about Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad. That's why you know it. So it's obvious to you. But someone who didn't know that, it's not so obvious. I mean, what are you saying? You're telling me that
I just
Atzilus is
thought it's a
Elikos.
fundamental
That's
principle.
correct. Yeah, but not everyone knows that. So,
Okay.
I mean, what?
Okay. He just, he's always saying God Lemavin, and, like assuming the people that are learning this already
The
know.
Rebbe Rashab is building a case here to understand the process of how it moves from the highest levels down to the lower levels.
I see. He's making a
You're
legal
asking
argument.
why
Yeah,
does
yeah,
he
yeah.
say things that may be obvious?
No,
Because that's part of the
yeah,
flow of the understanding of the idea.
yeah.
He
Okay.
needs to say it because he wants to explain how how does it actually move now from Atzilus to Biy'a if the Kalim
Are themselves,
are
yeah,
Ein Sof compared to
yeah,
a Biy'a? That's where he's going here with this.
yeah. I understand. Thank you.
And just for the record, if you really want to go beyond semantics, it requires plenty of explanation. I would challenge anyone here to explain what's the difference between the Ein Sof of the Oiris of Atzilus, the Ein Sof of the Kalim of Atzilus, and the Ein Sof higher than Atzilus. It's all nice words. But to
Yes.
really appreciate it, you have to really be able, like I always say, you need to explain it in Avodah terms, and also conceptually, but also in Avodah terms, what's really the difference? It's easy to say it's all relative. I didn't go into that right now intentionally, because I want to see how the whole, my focus is understanding what the Rebbe Rashab says, but then we will go back. I mean, in a number of classes, I have explained, because this is all in Atzilus and lower than Atzilus. Then you're talking about higher than Atzilus. Then you talk about higher than the Tzimtzum. And as I said a number of times, for many of us, understanding Asir Ruchnius is quite an achievement, let alone Atzilus, let alone Eir Ein Sof before the Tzimtzum. But the truth is, all these levels are part of the process, and each of us have to figure out on our terms. Like I said, every person has their measure, has to figure out how they understand the difference between the Achdus in the Oisius before the Tzimtzum, where there's no real actual Oisius, and the Achdus after the Tzimtzum, and the Keser, and then Atzilus, and then Biy'a. But that, as I said, deserves more of an explanation of the topic. Right now, we're learning the Rebbe Rashab's words, so we'll keep going with that. And then at some point, when we stop after a subject is finished, we can discuss it more in Avodah terms or applied Chassidus terms. Yeah, Valkain, he says. Okay, so therefore, being that compared to Biy'a, it's true. Atzilus has now, as he said, defined Chesed, that there's an actual Chesed. It's not just all part of God's Achdus. That would be before the Tzimtzum or even before Atzilus. There, it's all about Shleimus HaAtzmos, the Keich, like he said, the Midas HaAtzmim that are higher than anything. They're just coming because God is extending, has the power to give off Chesed. In Atzilus, you already have Ispilus, but not Ispilus from another. It's Ispilus from Hargosha. There's a feeling. There's an actual sensation called Chesed. It would be like God actually feeling Chesed. But it doesn't mean he's feeling it because we evoked it, or compassion because somebody is in need of empathy. But if that's his feeling, that's not Atzilus. However, in Biy'a, but it's still, compared to Biy'a, Ein Sof. So therefore, Valkain, because of that, Mebchinas Chesed Atzilus, no matter though the fact that it's already defined as Chesed, and there's actually 10 spheres, but like Bli Ma, as he just said, so Alkein Mebchinas Chesed Atzilus, Shu Mebchinas Ein Sof, I Efsher, Sheyisavim Men is Mebchinas Chesed de Biy'a, Shu Mebchinas Gvul. So yes, we move closer to Biy'a, like we learned earlier on page 1428. We move closer, Shaychus Le'elam is Biy'a, but he said there as well that it's Ein Sof L'Gabe Biy'a. I'm looking at the bottom third of the page on 1428. And that's where he brought Malchus. So he's going to go back to that now. So from Chesed Atzilus alone, you cannot create Chesed Biy'a, which is Gvul. Ukmoy Machne Michal Ba'ava. So earlier we brought about Machne Michal, the Machne, the camp of Michal, the angel Michal, is connected to Chesed Ava. Shein Nivroim Baalei Gvul. These angels, though they're spiritual angels and they're divine, but they are finite entities. You don't call them Ein Sof. And indeed, the Malachim dwell mostly either in Biy'a or Yetzirah, sometimes in Asiya. It says sometimes Ein Malach B'Atzilus, even though there are Malachim in Atzilus, but I'm not going to go into that right now. Malachim primarily are in Biy'a. Like we have the Srofim, Chayes HaKodesh, and the Efanim correspond to Biy'a, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So they're Baalei Gvul. U'kamoy kain b'chinas klei hachesed de'elam habriya, and similarly, and so too, the klei hachesed, the container of chesed in the world of Biy'a, va'eris, the ruach v'nefesh, hem b'chinas nivra Baalei Gvul, k'mei shekosa b'geres hakedesh simachov. So the kelim of Biy'a, and the eris of nefesh and ruach and nefesh, like he says in the Geras HaKodesh in Tanya 20, Epistle 20, are all Baal Gvul. It's true, the eris of Biy'a and the eira neshama of Biy'a, there he says, are more associated with Atzilus, but again, all relative. That's why he's bringing here the lower level. The kelim of Biy'a and the ruach and nefesh. Not neshama, he doesn't say neshama, ruach and nefesh. Ve'ein harech klal l'gab b'chinas chesed Atzilus. And they're infinitely apart. I know the word infinite is the right word, but ein harech klal, there's nothing commensurate between them and Atzilus. It's a quantum leap. U'kamesher kosav b'geras hakedesh siman tezvav, like he writes in the Geras HaKodesh 15, siman 15, epistle 15, be'inyan v'anochi ofer ve'efer, the b'chinas Avram. So Avram said, "Anochi ofer ve'efer, I am like dust and ash before God." So he explains in the Geras HaKodesh that b'chinas Avram, the elam habriya be'ein harech klal l'gabe b'chinas hachesed Atzilus. Because why is he so bottled? Because of the elam habriya, yeah. Because Avram, as he is in elam habriya, he's ofer ve'efer completely nullified compared to chesed of Atzilus, which is the root of Avram and Atzilus. V'zehu, and this is what we actually learned about this earlier. V'zehu Avram, psik taima b'gavayhu. Remember we learned earlier about the difference between Moshe and Avram. That Avram, when it says twice Avram, there's a psik taima, there's a line that separates between them. So earlier he learned that hu Avram, that tells us that Avram, as he is above, he also comes down below. But then he said, not quite like Moshe. Moshe, there's no psik taima. It's exactly the way it is above, it comes below. But Avram, there is a distinction. So he explains why. Because in order for there to be creation of Avram Chesed in the worlds of Biy'a, kindness, coming from Atzilus, tzorich li is dafkai the hefsek haparsa. You need to have the hefsek haparsa. You need the separation of the partition from between Atzilus and Biy'a. Sheyis alam eir Atzilus, that should conceal the light of Atzilus, the chesed of Atzilus. V'yumshach rak ha'ora de ha'ora levad, like a partition, like a curtain that diffuses the light. That there should only be a reflection of a reflection alone. So you see clearly there's a distinction between the chesed of Biy'a and the chesed of Atzilus. And what is this parsa? So here we go. This parsa, he b'chinas Malchus d'Atzilus. That's the level of Malchus of Atzilus. Shabam misalim ha'oir. In that level is where oir gets concealed. Now it's interesting. Often we talk about the parsa as being lower than Malchus. That between Malchus of Atzilus and Biy'a, there's a partition. But here he's saying the parsa is Malchus because he's talking about the lower level of Malchus that manifests within Matat. So it's actually Malchus, so to speak, traveling through a partition. The Pardes Ramak in the Erech Kanuyim, which is an Erech like an encyclopedic section So in the erech called the entry on pareches, which is a partition, a curtain, the zelashene, and this is his exact citing the exact language from the Pardes. Pareches nikra Malchus. The curtain is called Malchus. She pareches mosach. It's a partition, a curtain partition between Atzilus l'chol advarim asher tachtov, between Atzilus and everything that's below it. The tikra pareches. This is all still the language of the Pardes, and it's called pareches. B'chinas tachtena asher lo, the lower level in Malchus, shehi hamavdelas ben hakedesh u ben kedesh hakadoshim. Ad kan l'shene. It's called pareches because, like the pareches in the Mishkan, that separates between the holy and the holy of holies. So here the holy would be Biy'a, and the holy of holies would be Atzilus. So you have a pareches in between. That pareches is Malchus. The lower level of Malchus that now creates that partition, and therefore allows for Chesed, the Ein Sof of Chesed of Atzilus, to manifest in a gvul, in a limited, defined Chesed of Biy'a. Now, there's many ways this is explained. I'll just say one quickly, and I mentioned it a while back, that sometimes we speak about the spheres of Atzilus. We know there are 10 spheres. And you'd see the Taka says, Eser spheres blima, 10 spheres without substance, but it also says, Eser v'lei tesha, Eser v'lei achadosa. 10 and not 9 and not 11. So how do you reconcile that with Ein Sof? You're saying it's 10, not more, not less. And you say they're not substance. How do you explain that? So one of the ways this explains it, it says it's Ein Sof this pashtuse. Chesed and Gvura and Atzilus are not the same. They're not like they are in the nebulous state before Atzilus, where you could say they're all concentrated like in one cell. They are separate entities. That's what makes it Atzilus. In Akudim, you have 10 energies in one container. In the Kudim, in Toyu, you have 10 energies and 10 containers, but they're not balanced, they're not harmonious. In Atzilus, is 10 energies and 10 containers. And yet we're calling it Ein Sof. So Chassidus says it's Ein Sof lis pashtuse. It means Chesed is not Gvura. Ein Sof does not mean that Chesed becomes Gvura and Gvura becomes Chesed. It means Chesed can be extended infinite. So it's the path of Chesed, not Gvura, but it goes forever. Whereas Chesed and Biy'a, besides being Chesed and not Gvura, is also limited. It doesn't go forever. So the Ein Sof part is its extension. So Chesed of Atzilus can give Chesed without limits, Gvura without limits. And in Biy'a, the Chesed and Gvura become Gvul. Now, how does that happen? So he said that's the pareches, the parsa, that separates and therefore diminishes the Chesed of Atzilus to become a finite Chesed, which of course allows for the creation of a finite world called Biy'a, with Atzilus, relatively speaking, still Ein Sof, not Ein Sof that doesn't have structure, but the structure itself has an Ein Sof element to it. This is one explanation, among others, in understanding this a bit. And I think we should stop here. The Ad Kan L'Shen is a good place to stop. Almost halfway down the page, on page 1431. Take any questions, and then we'll sign off. Yeah.
Rabbi Simon, if we're going to look at these Olamos as consciousness levels in our universe, in our personal universe, how would I see, let's say that on Atzilus or on Biy'a, there's Malachim and there's Seraphim. What does that mean for me in my consciousness that there are none of them in Asiya?
What was the last line? That none of them are in Asiya?
Let's say there's no Malachim in the world.
Who says there are no
Asiya?
Malachim in Asiya? There are Malachim.
I heard
I said Srofim is in Biy'a, Chayes HaKodesh is in Yetzirah, and Ifanim are in Asiya.
Okay, so how do I integrate that into my experience? What does that mean?
Well, you first have to understand the difference between these three types of angels, or the difference between these three worlds. I mean, I've explained it in the past. I don't want to go into it right now, but we will discuss it at some point. But practically speaking, it all comes down to understanding these worlds, what they are, the real question you're asking: what's Asiya consciousness? What's Yitzira consciousness? What's Biy'a consciousness? And what's Atzilus consciousness? So that's the difference when we say Neshama Shenasata Bi every morning. Tahirihi is Atzilus. Ata Barasa is Biy'a. Ata Yitzarta is Yitzira. Ata Nafachta Bi. And Vata Meshamri Bekirbi is Asiya. So you're really asking what is the meaning, the kavana in all those 4 levels. That right? That's what you're asking?
Yeah. And
Okay,
how do
so
I?
I'll explain it, but not right now. Now is not a good time for that. I'll explain it at some point.
Okay, thank you.
I have given classes on that, what they mean in our personal work and our personal structure and personal levels of growth.
I could
But
guess
we'll-
that the parachas between Atzilus and it's like if we really felt all the love, we would break from Hashem's love. That it has to be channeled into smaller.
Yeah, that's obvious. That's the creation. But you're asking what it means in our consciousness.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions for now? So we'll stop here. Almost midway. Anybody? Someone wants to say something? Almost midway down. I'm just going to stop the recording now. So page 1431, almost midway down, we'll stop.